What everyone's focused on right now is the Senate yesterday passed President Trump's big, beautiful bill.
Yes.
Had to call in the vice president for the tie-breaking vote.
Right.
But he also apparently was able to convince Lisa Murkowski of Alaska to side with the bill, losing a few Republicans there as well. But now it heads to the House.
Yes.
And you've been in politics a long time. We know that in order for this to get done, the House can't change anything to what the Senate gave them.
That whole process has to
gets
restart.
kicked right back.
Right.
We're now hearing that there are some Republicans that are saying that they're no's right now, in some accounts as many as 15 to 20. When you know that members of the House are saying no, most of these big Trump supporters,
Yes.
What do you think ends up happening here?
I think phone calls are starting from the president direct saying, I need you on this. And obviously that number of 20 is not sustainable. So if that number is true, this would be a failure before the votes begin. So I don't think they would even call for a vote if that number is true, which we're going to know very soon because the president and the goal is to get this done before the July 4th holiday so things don't revert back. But the idea, what you said, Will, is they can't ask for more concessions. So that's the difference. This is a pressure campaign now. I heard it this morning just coming into the office here. We're in Tennessee, a couple of members of Congress locally here who have said that they may not vote against it. Those ads are already running saying call and tell them to vote for President Trump's landmark legislation. I think that's what this is up to is in the next 24 hours, is President Trump able to convince the American people this is really about his agenda, this is really about what you voted for, and that these Republicans are actually standing in the way of what President Trump won on? And why he won was making these promises like the tax cuts being permanent to the American people. But it's still uphill until you cross over. You saw with J.D. Vance having to come in. That's up until the last moment. Again, Republicans can't get concessions, so they're not going to get more out of this by holding out. The question is, what can they get in the future? What other deals can be made about other legislation? That I don't think we're going to necessarily know. What we will know is if this vote occurs, we will know that it's not up to 20. Now, do you sometimes start these votes and you're still a couple votes short because you want to put the pressure on? Absolutely, absolutely. Are any of these Republican rogues willing to be the one vote by themselves that actually killed the president's landmark piece of legislation in his second term?
So let's go ahead and take Jimmy calling on line 2. He's calling from California. Jimmy, you're on Seculo.
I'm extremely disappointed in all of this, to be honest with you. And main reason why is because of, all the waste and the fraud and the abuse and all this stuff that they've been uncovering millions and billions of dollars that have been being stolen from us. And all these people that are trying to pass this bill, they want to fight it tooth and nail, every inch on it, send it back and forth and this and that. And it's not even that good. It's not even as good as it really should be, in my opinion. There's absolutely no excuse, in my opinion, for these people to be fighting any of this. And in my opinion, every single one of them should be fired. Every one of them has failed us. Every one of them needs a pay cut, if anything. They don't deserve the money that they've been getting out of us either.
Jimmy,
you know what I mean?
I definitely hear your frustration. Actually, I don't disagree with the frustration, especially what was revealed through DOJ, seeing all the waste, fraud, and abuse. Yeah, it was criminal at many of these agencies. As a matter of fact, I mean, the HHS and the FDA just unveiled all this criminal fraud that was going on under the eyes of the...
I don't think we've seen yet really the full outcome of what's going to occur with some of those cuts. I think we're just starting to get to the beginning of that, where we're starting to see a little bit less politicized and a little bit more about the actual waste, fraud, and abuse that they found in these agencies and actually getting those cuts made. But I think it's important to know why we are in this situation, the filibuster. So this is a budget reconciliation process, which means you are never going to get to 100%. Now, it's up to you and the American people to decide, does this give you, does 70% of what you want, is that enough for you? Or would you still vote no? And what would you encourage your member of Congress to do? They'll ultimately have to own this vote. It's very tough to say right now when you still have the number at 20 that this is definitely going to pass. But in the Senate, we saw this come down to literally the vice president's vote. I would imagine if you look at the history of Mike Johnson as Speaker, he's been able to move these through. Now, the negotiating is, like you said, over. We played a bite during the break that I thought was very telling from Speaker Johnson, and that was, listen, the Senate did their thing. They did a little bit more than we wanted to, But he's not saying we're going to go and change that, because if you do, you're just restarting this process. You're looking at potentially, not funding the government correctly. I think what the White House and now Speaker Johnson needs to do in these 24 hours or less is start explaining to the American people about why they vote yes. Why do you tell your member of Congress who might be one of those 15 holdouts, why do you pick up the phone like the ads are asking you to do? In red states, you're probably hearing these ads right now. Why pick up the phone and do that? And I think now I've been overseas for a month, but I remember this process had started a couple weeks before I left. I was in a meeting with Speaker Johnson when the big, beautiful bill was announced, the name was announced, and they have stuck with that name. But ultimately they knew then, so this is more than 6 weeks ago, how difficult this would be coming up on the July 4th holiday, and now we're here. And so this is a time, I think, where do you go with the president, who many of you support very vigorously, and say, you know what, he's telling you, vote for this, trust me on this, or you're going to go with a member of Congress, may not even be your member of Congress, in the House, who potentially just didn't get what they wanted in this. Sometimes there's 435 members of Congress. You've got to convince the Republicans, and maybe some of these Republicans didn't get exactly what they wanted in this piece of legislation. Not to say that's the best way to legislate, is have 200 something odd people put in what they want, then say vote on it. But that is how the reconciliation process works. There's a lot of limitations as well. You saw the parliamentarian strike some of the amendments down. That is just dealing with reality so long as we have a filibuster.
Well, and to the caller's point about that not enough was done, I think also people widely may be conflating the budget reconciliation process with like the omnibus and appropriations bills that we see that are where all the spending goes. That's where you see all those like pork project line items that you're like, how is this still being in there? And then the omnibus, they're just keeping funding levels the same way because our Congress can't come to an agreement on anything. But what budget reconciliation can do is actually very limited.
Yes.
So the waste, fraud, and abuse that we want to really tackle is more found in things like appropriations bills, discretionary funding. There's really only three things that budget reconciliation can, one, to avoid the filibuster, of which we know there is not enough Democrats that would allow it to move forward for a real non-budget reconciliation process.
Not of anything you'd want to support.
And the only things that you can address in budget reconciliation are mandatory spending, which is not even defense spending. No. Defense spending is considered discretionary spending. So mandatory spending, that's why a lot of the focus is on the more entitlement programs, Medicaid, Medicare, and then you can only, you can raise revenues or decrease revenues through taxes, which is why the tax cuts are a big thing.
Yes.
And then you can affect the debt limit through it. So really only three things here. Now, what can be done of the agenda of President Trump, about 75 to 85% of what he ran on, he can get new policies and things in place. Right. But a lot of the cuts to the programs that we most desperately need to root out waste, fraud, and abuse can't even be touched by budget reconciliation.
No, that's not happening through this process.
But also, the things like Medicare fraud, Medicaid fraud can be addressed. And that is part of the reason why there is a big welfare reform angle to this, which is very similar to what Newt Gingrich and Bill Clinton were praised for coming together on in the early 90s, is now the Democrats couldn't even see what their past leadership came together with Republicans on, because it is so taboo to even go anywhere near President Trump, that they're saying that this is going to end the lives of people.
Of course.
So you can't buy the hype.
In politics, we hear it about, I think it's every 5-6 years, that somehow piece of legislation, where you push grandma off the cliff. This is the same story once again, is that, people are not going to be able to get food, or people are not going to be able to get services. People are going to get their services. This is about, again, whether or not, and this will be the politics of this. We saw this leading up to the vote. I mean, we saw this kind of fringe movement who has been anti the Iran strikes. They're taking on this mantle as well. So this will be a lot of tests to see is when they ultimately has to get to a vote. And I'm not saying if you can be one of the votes that doesn't matter, that's easy to kind of write off. But if you have to be one of the two members of Congress and you ran on basically being a MAGA Republican or a Trump Republican, and maybe President Trump coming to your district or coming to your state is really what got you over the edge, are you going to be able to vote no on this when, as Will said, it gets you 80% of the way there? And in politics, usually you take 75 or 80% as a win. And you move on to fight that other 20%, you fight it out. And you could fight that out with Democrats, and you've got to move that through other pieces of legislation. Why is the timing of this so significant? I think the timing is significant because the closer we get to midterms, and every time you get through a summer, it's going to get tougher and tougher to pass legislation like this. So this is really that one opportunity to pass major legislative reform through this process of reconciliation that allows you to get to that 75%. It's not perfect. We know Washington is far from perfect. The reforms that are necessary to make Washington even get closer to where we'd all like to see it, we have not yet seen. And we have not yet, honestly, seen enough of a Republican majority willing to stick together through those fights. It is such a fragile majority, and we've seen that play out through a couple of issues unrelated to this bill in just the last couple weeks leading up to this.
We are so excited to announce the ACLJ's brand new app, completely redesigned to provide you with the best tools available to partner with us at the ACLJ. You can watch the daily Seculo program, sign the petitions, customize your ACLJ membership experience, donate with the click of a button, and receive up-to-the-minute critical updates that the mainstream media can't censor. Just scan the QR code on your screen or go to your phone's app store, search ACLJ, and click install. It's that simple.